On March 8th, the boxing world will once again focus on arguably the new mecca of boxing, Saudi Arabia. This time taking the limelight will be Anthony Joshua, who will be looking to continue his good form, and former UFC champion Francis Ngannou, who was very unlucky in many people's eyes not to get the decision versus Tyson Fury, and both will be wanting to prove a point. While we also have Chinese heavyweight star Big Bang Zhang, who's knocking at the door for a title shot after 2 destructive performances versus Joe Joyce last year. However, he comes up against the in-form and former heavyweight champ in Joseph Parker, who outpointed a lackluster Deontay Wilder with ease, but still in an impressive performance. In today's tactical overview, we're doing things a bit different than usual. I'm bringing in Zico from the Fight Diary, who you may have seen from my podcast content, and we'll cover a fighter from each fight to give you our analysis on the strengths and weaknesses of their styles and the tactics required in these heavyweight showdowns. So on that note, let's get right into it. First up, let's start with Anthony Joshua. Ever since his 2 defeats to Usyk, he was in shaky form and slightly gun-shy despite his 2 victories over Franklin and Helenius. Originally, he was with American trainer Derek James, but Joshua decided to look closer to home and take on the services of Ben Davidson and his team for the massive Day of Reckoning event versus Otto Wallin, Tyson Fury's former trainer of all people. And going off that performance alone, AJ very much looked back to his old self, putting on a menacing display which culminated in Wallin's corner throwing in the towel before the start of the 6th round. And it's a testament to Joshua taking advantage of his destructive power with greater ring generalship, and you can't help but think Davidson and his team have played a part in his improvement. While personally, I think it was just nice to see a less tentative version of him ever since the KO loss to Andy Ruiz all those years ago. But let's take a look at his strengths and weaknesses in terms of how it could play an impact in this fight versus Ngannou. Now, Joshua's technical prowess was on full display in his recent matchup with Wallin, with fluid movement, crisp combinations, and effective defensive skills at the same time. And going up against someone like Ngannou, who is still finding his feet in the sport, I think this will be crucial for Joshua to play to his strengths and use his technical prowess as a boxer to really take advantage of Ngannou's lack of. Now, Joshua's aggression in the fight as well versus Wallin surpassed his previous outings against Robert Helenius and Franklin, demonstrating a renewed determination to assert his dominance in the ring. And for me, I feel applying pressure will be key for Joshua in this fight. Tyson Fury pretty much boxed in the back foot, allowing Ngannou to put the pressure on, while knocking down Fury in itself created that hesitation. However, I also do feel he needs to keep a bit of space between him and Ngannou as well, and avoid the clinch game, as of course Ngannou is an MMA fighter, and we even saw Tyson Fury struggle in this area, and this is something Zico will touch on later in this video. In terms of the jab, I think this will be crucial for Joshua, and we've seen him utilise this amazingly well in fights in the past, especially against the likes of Joseph Parker all those years ago, where he really controlled the bout by using his jab to establish the range and disrupt his opponent's rhythm.
The old saying is, the right hand can take you around the block, but a good jab will take you around the world. And that secured another world championship belt.
Even against Wallin, he was using it very successfully against the southpaw, and I feel if he can get maybe Ngannou into a lead hand battle, he may just be able to open him up himself and land precise counters with the backhand.
In the shots at all.
While Francis does tend to parry a lot, so feinting with the lead hand may just open up for one of Joshua's left hook counters.
Hesitant, he's looking like he's sort of twitching, not in.
But his jab will be key in creating these openings. Now obviously Joshua's trademark power punches, particularly that right hand or uppercut, have proved devastating in the past. We even saw that versus Wallin in this southpaw matchup, and we have seen AJ being able to set up this beautifully well in the past, usually behind his lead hand. And as I mentioned with Ngannou looking to parry the jab quite often, I think actively looking to exploit this or even going to the body create the openings for the right hand could just help him set up the knockout punch. While Joshua is also very good at throwing the left hook at mid to close range after throwing the right hand, taking advantage of his natural leverage with his huge frame to generate the power. Another underrated side of Joshua is his body attacks. And this is something Joshua has generally been pretty good with over the years, when at close exchanges he does look to throw that right hand to the body. And we saw this most recently versus Usyk. And against an MMA fighter who's still finding his feet in the sport, consistent body attacks could help to slow him down and obviously create the openings up top later in the fight. And we did start to see him slow down in the fight versus Tyson Fury, the tail end of the fight. So I think this will be a key investment for Anthony Joshua to target the body and wear down a man still getting used to the sport. Now, in terms of his weaknesses, Joshua has demonstrated improved footwork and ring control as a whole. Nevertheless, opponents with more superior movement and agility, as seen in the fight versus Usyk, can punish Joshua if he's not ready to move with the opponent by pivoting. And in no way am I saying Ngannou could exploit this. He is a lot more agile than most other heavyweights I believe Joshua has actually faced, and this is something Zico will touch on later. While there's no hiding away from there is defensive lapses in his game. And we've seen Joshua get drawn into unnecessary battles only to find himself getting caught. While versus Usyk, we saw him get drawn into the lead hand battle only for him to get countered. And I'm sure Ngannou and his team will have looked at that as a potential opening. While Joshua has always been considered a predictable fighter, especially as the rounds go on, and he of course starts to slow down. For the most part, he looks to get behind his jab before setting up his right straight, while at close exchanges will look to tie you up or look to throw the right uppercut left hook. And I suspect on the inside, Ngannou could exploit Joshua in these situations due to his grappling and wrestling experience. In terms of the tactics for AJ, I think he needs to carry on that aggressive momentum from his victory from Wallin, asserting his dominance early with the jab and imposing his will on Ngannou, pushing him back. And this will be leveraged for his jab and trademark power punches. And this will help establish some range so Ngannou can't close the distance and fight him on the inside, where he will be looking to exploit, no doubt, while his use of feints will help disrupt Ngannou's rhythm and capitalise on openings to inflict damage. While recognising Ngannou's potential weaknesses is his endurance and defence, Joshua should strategically target the body and exploit the defensive lapses, while it's also very important for Joshua to remain adaptable throughout this fight and be prepared to adjust to the strategy in response to Ngannou's unorthodox style and his power punches. And as much as he's inexperienced in this game, this is heavyweight boxing, and one lapse of concentration from Joshua could be lights out. And while prioritising his offense will be key in terms of pushing Ngannou back and making him uncomfortable, his defensive awareness is going to be absolutely key, and he can't make the same mistakes Tyson Fury made, or he could see a similar outcome. Now guys, here's Zico's analysis on Francis Ngannou and how he could possibly win this fight.
The hardest hitting MMA fighter in the world, Francis Ngannou, made shockwaves around the sport of boxing recently with his incredible performance against Tyson Fury. A fight that the majority of people thought he stood no chance at all. Many fans even had him winning that fight. This just goes to show that Francis does belong in there with the top guys. But was this really just a one-time fluke, or will he be able to pull off something spectacular again with his next boxing match against Anthony Joshua? Now, what Francis Ngannou has as compared to other MMA fighters who transitioned into the sport of boxing was that his striking base has always been, well, boxing. And he also possesses incredible one-punch power that can put anyone to sleep. His solid boxing combined with his physical attributes have gotten him a very long way. Now he is set off to fight the hardest puncher he will be facing as of to date, Anthony Joshua, in just his second pro boxing fight. Will this end up being a Cinderella story for Francis, or is he biting off more than he can chew? Now, despite being known for his one-punch power, Francis has been constantly evolving throughout his career, and he is still learning more in each and every fight. For an MMA fighter, Francis can have pretty bouncy footwork. Well, before he starts to gas out at least. He likes to use this as a means of defense, stepping away from the line of attack when he sees fit. He also likes to incorporate the use of parries when it comes to his defense, slightly using his rear hand to touch away at jabs coming straight at him. This is a pretty simple technique, but also a good way of stopping your opponent from getting set up with a jab. Simply parrying it away can halt their momentum. Even with his stance alone, you can already see him anticipating to parry the opponent's jabs. He even keeps his palm on his rear hand open when wearing MMA gloves. He also tends to keep his lead hand low while his rear hand is always guarding his face, almost as if his rear hand is glued to his head. The reason as to why he keeps his lead hand low is because he likes to keep it loose so he can constantly stay active with it. He uses his lead hand in a variety of different ways, either as a way to keep the opponent occupied with something or as a means to create reactions from the opponent, which will help eventually set up his right hand for the power shot. His favorite combination of which to pull that off is a jab to the head, then to the body, followed up by an overhand. More than just getting reactions out of his opponents with the lead hand, Francis resorts to body feints as well. However, just like any other combat sport, everybody gets hit eventually, but Francis's chin is also incredibly tough. A lot of the biggest punches that have ever landed on him have only ever phased him, and even when faced against the boxing heavyweight champion, Tyson Fury, it looks as if none of his punches even hurt Francis. Now, Fury may not be the biggest puncher, but that is still a huge feat considering that this was also Francis's boxing debut. In fact, he would even use his chin as a means to land a shot of his own, taking a punch straight so it can create an opening for Francis to land an even bigger punch on the opponent. And that's exactly what happened to Tyson Fury when he got knocked down. Fury caught Francis on the jaw clean, but at the exact same time Fury caught him, Francis threw a left hook. There was a huge power discrepancy between them. Despite missing the left hook counter most times and getting hit clean by Fury, Francis could take it, and the few times his left hook did land put a lot of damage on Fury. What Francis also brought with him to the squared circle is his clinch fighting. Having all that knowledge in grappling has also paid dividends to his boxing game, because nobody can really push him around in the clinch. Fury's tactic of smothering the opponent with his weight failed drastically here, as Francis quite literally ragdolled him in the clinch, and even when in this position, Francis will constantly remain fighting. Initially, I thought this wouldn't transfer as much to boxing, but after his knockdown over Tyson Fury, he reminded all of us that he will be a problem in the heavyweight division. As good as Francis is, he still has a few glaring weaknesses, such as he tends to leave himself open when going in for the finishing blow. This was especially evident in his second fight with Stipe right before he knocked him out. Oftentimes, he will even start flailing his punches just to get that knockout, but this leaves him very open to getting countered. Now, I know I said a while ago that Francis has a granite chin, but this time he will be up against the biggest puncher that he has ever faced. Will he be able to withstand AJ's blows like he did with so many others? Another thing to exploit from Francis is how he parries the jab. He tends to overdo this, and he will even have a very big reaction to the most minuscule of feints. This parrying motion makes him completely open for a headshot. If AJ would simply loop his left hook so it goes over Francis's rear hand when he parries, then Francis could find himself in a world of trouble. Francis also doesn't have the best gas tank in the game. Yes, while he did make it to the end of 10 rounds with Fury, you could see him really starting to slow down, and this could provide even more opportunities for AJ to land on him. I think a reason as to why he gasses out is because he throws a lot of his punches with 100% intensity. Lack of experience in boxing is still also a key factor. How will Francis deal with it if he's the one on the back of the ropes and about to be knocked down? First and foremost for this matchup, Francis is going to need to have a bit more emphasis on his defense. I don't think he can risk getting hit by big punches by a guy like Anthony Joshua. Francis should also have a wider array of setting up his punches. Based on what I have seen, he sets everything up with a jab, which is honestly not wrong. I just think he needs to vary the way he throws his jab a little more and find different ways of landing the big punch aside from just the jab. Maybe he can do something similar to what he did to Stipe in their second fight, wherein he switched stances as he was going forward and knocked Stipe down. Do not overcommit to your punches. Francis puts a lot into many of his punches, and this can cause him to gas out. Focusing more on volume combination punching could eventually break down AJ, and then Francis' power will naturally come once the openings start showing. At the end of the day, this is a battle between two big hitters, so everything can change in an instant.
Now, Big Bang Zhang is coming off an impressive victory against Joe Joyce in his recent encounters last year in 2023, and is set to face Joseph Parker in an intriguing matchup. And Zhang's consecutive wins over Joyce have solidified his position as one of the best contenders in the heavyweight division, showcasing his skill, power and resilience. Now, Zhang looks to maintain his momentum as he steps in the ring against Parker, a former world champion known for his speed and technical proficiency. But with the Chinese star now in his 40s, does he have what it takes to defeat a confident and in form Parker? First up, let's look at his strengths and weaknesses. Now, Zhang is obviously a southpaw, and that presents unique challenges for opponents in itself who aren't used to it, as it disrupts their typical defensive strategies against orthodox fighters and opens up angles for effective counterpunching for himself, which I'll touch on soon. But not to be too obvious, Zhang does fight like a southpaw. He does all the right things. He looks to try get the outside position, while he also looks to lead opponents into his devastating right hook. They try to get the outside position themselves, only to find themselves getting clobbered by an unexpected hook. Now, Zhang is also a terrific counter-puncher, where he looks to slip the opponent's left or right hand either side, timing you with a left hand straight or right hook, before firing a devastating left cross behind it. While he typically draws out punches by going into a high guard, and having such a big and imposing figure might make you think he might be slow, but in fact, he is very quick off the mark with his punches and countering, making him one of the most dangerous counterpunchers in the heavyweight division in my opinion. While you'll also see him catch and shoot, blocking his opponent's punch before quickly returning. Zhang has also showcased resilience and durability in the face of adversity, absorbing powerful shots and still continuing to press forward somehow. even in the midst of intense exchanges. While he's also very defensively sound, which does probably help in this department too. In terms of his footwork, as I mentioned before, he very much fights like a southpaw should, looking to get the outside position, while very subtly looking to fight at a mid-range, sliding in and out of distance, often looking to use parries with his lead hand in a fencing probing battle, which is often in orthodox versus southpaw matchups, while using a high guard to block anything that comes down the pipe or around the sides. Overall, he is just very economical in his movements, and you can tell he's almost conserving his energy so he can counter you with a big bang. Now for me, Zhang is also very adaptable in the ring, adjusting and changing his tune depending on what his opponent is doing. He can quite as easily box on the back foot using the high guard, or when he's coming forward, looks to probe out the lead hand and push you back, as of course he looks to get a reaction out of you, trying to get you within his own rhythm by throwing out his lead hand. And this can be quite confusing for opponents on whether they should come forward and be more aggressive against him, or if they should look to box from the outside and counter him. And because he has quite a slow style at times, this works in his favour in terms of being able to adapt to his opponent, as they can't figure out what he's going to do next. Now in terms of his weaknesses, he does have some defensive vulnerabilities. He himself often leaves himself open to counterattacks, exposing his chin as he tries to land the left hand or right hook. While because of his southpaw stance, you'll often see guys trying to set up the right hand against him. And because he opts to use a high guard or looks to slip the punch itself, he'll momentarily drop the guard only for him to get countered himself. And this leads on to my second point. You could argue he does have endurance issues, especially as the rounds go on, opting to just go into his high guard, blocking shots with it. However, this gives a great target for opponents to throw the right hand down to the body or up top. And although he's blocking these punches, it's still usually the force of a heavyweight punch, which does force him back, often taking heavy punches on the arms only to see him drop his guard, and of course take punches because of that in itself. Now although I did say Zhang's footwork overall is very good, in terms of his positioning and balance, it is still somewhat limited compared to agile opponents, especially with his upcoming opponent in Joseph Parker, who has very good in and out movement and superior lateral movement and mobility. As I mentioned, it will come down to his endurance and if he's even capable of closing the distance at that point in the fight. As we saw in the Hrgovic fight, he opts to just go into the high guard, allowing opponents to pivot around him and attack him from different angles. And because he does use that high guard quite often, he is very open for the body shot. However, opponents need to be careful when they do this, as this is something he often looks to counter. Nevertheless, as the rounds go on, this is definitely an area to target as he starts to tire. Now in terms of tactics going into this, Zhang needs to leverage his southpaw advantage, as Parker hasn't fought one since 2016, and as far as I know, has only faced one in his pro career so far. And yes, although Parker has had an extensive amateur career and no doubt lots of sparring versus southpaws, I believe this could be a problem for Joseph Parker to get a grip of. And I wouldn't be surprised if Parker struggles with the positioning in the early rounds, trying to capitalise on his angles to land the right hand. However, he needs to be careful of this, as Zhang likes to set you up with his own right hand when you do this. Now Zhang obviously has the big bang behind his heavy and impactful punches, and I believe this could wear down Parker if he tries to assert his dominance similar to the Wilder fight, as this will play into his counter-punching southpaw style, and I think he should capitalise on Parker's offensive aggression or defensive lapses when he's coming into range, either looking to slip the jabs or right hand of Parker before firing back with a quick combination or single counterpunch. Now the other area I believe Zhang will need to target is the body of Parker to slow down his speed and momentum, as he is a lot more agile as I discussed before. And Zhang is very good at throwing quick combinations to the body in those close exchanges, often making opponents quite weary if they should commit or not again. And although I don't think this will win the fight, I think the investments early will be key for the Chinese star. While I think Zhang should remain adaptable throughout the fight. As we know, he does start to tire in the later rounds, so he needs to be economical in his movements, whether he's looking to push back Parker or looking to draw him in so he can counter him. And I think it will be key for Zhang to get Parker to fight in his rhythm, to slow down the pace of the fight and get him to fight his fight. We've seen in the past Parker start to get a bit lost if he can't figure out an opponent, including Zhang's former opponent in Joe Joyce, who Joyce was able to knock out. Even in the past in other fights like Dillian Whyte and Anthony Joshua, when he doesn't have an answer or can't figure his opponent out, that is when they start to capitalise on him. In summary, I think Zhang's southpaw advantage combined with his power, aggression and strategic positioning will be absolutely key for this bout. And I think he has to capitalise on his strengths early in the fight if he has a chance of winning this one, whether that be by knockout or going into the later rounds, because Zhang will tire at some point. Now, here's Zico's analysis on Joseph Parker.
Another great battle before the main event is between Joseph Parker and Zhang, and this could very well set up who will be next in line for a shot at the heavyweight title. Joseph Parker may have had a few hiccups in his career, but don't let this fool you because he is still a game opponent and has gotten some momentum with his upset victory over Wilder. Now, what separates Parker's left hook from most other guys is that he throws this in a looping motion. He typically likes to throw his left hook from a hands down low position, and this can cause real problems for the opponent because from that position, it's hard to tell if he will be aiming for the body or the head. He varies the trajectory of the left hook with this looping motion, so it's always a hard read, and he utilizes feints as well. Not only that, but at times he will use this exact same looping motion but turn the left hook into an uppercut instead. If the left hook isn't finding the exact mark, he will then opt for throwaway punches. These are punches that are not meant to do any sort of real damage to the opponent, but rather to keep them occupied just enough so that Parker can land the bigger blow. Joseph will oftentimes just touch up the opponent with the left hook or jab to blind them and come in with a power punch right after. This power punch can vary. It can either be a cross, an uppercut, or a hook. Parker will choose what punch he best sees fit depending on the reaction of the opponent from the throwaway punch. When it comes to defense, Parker typically likes to use one hand to protect the most vulnerable part, which is his chin. He will use his entire forearm and block his chin with it while his lead hand stays active and loose. However, this has caused him to get in trouble in the past. With such a low hands approach when it comes to his defense, this has led Parker to take unnecessary punishment. A guy with a decent jab could quickly get to him. If Parker's hands were simply up during these moments, then he could have avoided these punches. Over-relying on just the forearm to defend your chin isn't always the best way to go, and Joe Joyce capitalized on that. He also has issues with ring generalship and would move back in a straight line instead of angling out to the sides. This has caused him to have his back on the ropes and take damage that he otherwise wouldn't have taken if he had simply tried to angle out instead of moving back. However, with experience comes knowledge, and he upped his game for his match with Wilder. This time around, he made it a point to keep center control of the ring. Now he could better dictate the pace of the fight and put himself in positions that would favor him. Since he is in the center, he also has space behind him. This means that when Wilder explodes forward at him, Parker would have space to step back away. This would be the opposite scenario for Wilder. Since his back is to the ropes, he has nowhere to retreat, and this was why Parker was eventually able to land that crazy overhand punch. He also had a more hands-up stance. With his new hands-up stance, he utilized more of a long guard type of defense. He would put his lead hand out as he's moving back to derail Wilder's forward momentum as compared to before, wherein he would just use his forearm and block his chin. He would also combine this with a textbook guard if he's not able to step back in time. Simply shelling up can save you from a lot of damage. He also utilized one of the advantages a shorter man has over the taller man, and that is body punching. Constantly mixing up punches both to the head and to the body and throwing them in combination.
I agree. There you go. That's it. I would kind of just start switching my game plans to stay away from the right hand, because pretty much that. You let your guard down for a second.
And he fixed a very big issue he had before, and that was he was no longer moving back in a straight line. The few times Wilder went forward in this fight, Parker would make sure not to move back against the ropes. He would dodge the punch and try to angle out immediately back to the center of the ring. Now, unlike Deontay Wilder, I don't think Zhang is going to be stepping back as much. He's gonna aim to meet Parker right at the center. Above all else, Parker must not revert to his old habit of stepping back in a straight line, because once he finds himself against the ropes, this is where Zhang can really capitalize on him. Parker should aim to constantly be moving around him and angle out away from the ropes. Zhang's not really the fastest guy, so it may cause problems for him trying to chase someone down. With the more compact stance and movement he showed in the Wilder fight, I think Parker can do just that. Staying in one spot would just be bad news against a guy like Zhang. When Parker does attack, he should aim for quick punches and constantly mix both to the body and the head. I don't think Parker has the firepower to knock out Zhang, but that constant mix-up of punches could potentially lead to Parker finding more openings for bigger shots, which could at least make Zhang respect Parker's power. This is important because if Parker doesn't get Zhang to respect his power, then Parker is going to get walked down the entire fight and will eventually not be able to keep up moving around the ring. Feinting would also be very crucial as Parker attacks. Zhang's lead hook counter is really good, and if he can anticipate when Parker's about to attack, then this punch could very well knock Parker out. Parker needs to make Zhang second guess himself before committing to a counter, and he can do that by being more unpredictable with feints. This is going to be a very tough task for Parker. Unlike Wilder, Zhang throws a lot more combinations and does not solely rely on one punch power. He also throws short punches, so it's going to be a lot harder to anticipate them as compared to Wilder, who would really wind up on his shots. Not to mention his lead hook counter that may cause problems for Parker when he does decide to attack.
Overall, I'm really looking forward to both these matchups next weekend. I'd be very surprised if there's no knockdowns in either of these two fights, if I'm being honest. Personally, I think like most of us, we do believe Joshua does have what it takes to beat Francis Ngannou. However, Ngannou did prove in his last fight versus Fury, he does have the technical proficiency to fight heavyweights at this level. And the question for me is whether Joshua and his team are now able to exploit him because they have footage of him, or is Francis Ngannou actually just that good? And for Parker versus Zhang, this is another fight I'm really looking forward to see who comes out on top. Both fighters are on form, and both are once again knocking at the door for a world title shot, or even get the winner of the main event. This has been Jamie from Boxing Life. I want to say a big thank you to Zico from The Fight Diary on Francis Ngannou's and Parker's analysis. I'm sure we'll get him on the channel once again. As always guys, enjoy the fights when they come. Let me know your predictions in the comments below. And as always, I'll see you in the next one.